Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ammar Bin Suaini from SR241 Sports Management. My code is M13. So, the title of my research is Effect of Coach Verbal Aggression on Motivation of the Sports Student. So, the first one is about background of study. The independent variable for my research is verbal aggressiveness or verbal aggression, and the dependent variable is about motivation. So, verbal aggressiveness was perceived as a character attribute which enables an individual may target inculcated self-concepts to inflict psychological or mental pain. The results of previous research have shown that verbal aggressiveness contributes to negative results. The continued verbal aggression against an individual or group of people is probably to be considered as mental assault that in part may contribute to experience helplessness. While for the dependent variable, which is motivation, the previous researcher describes motivation as the intention of behavior, which is approach, abandonment, or if and the strength of the attempt. The theory of self-determination was a common motivational approach that has been successfully implemented to sports. For the statement of problem, the reason of researchers conduct this study is because some coaches were using verbal aggression towards their athletes or sports students, and verbal aggression were more frequent when the coach was using autocratic leadership style. It is because previous studies suggested that coaches have a significant role on all areas of the training of athletes. Next, we move to the research objective. There were two research objectives in this study, which is the first one is to determine the motivation factors among sports students at UiTM Seremban 3, and the second one is to identify the relationship between perceived coaches' verbal aggressiveness and motivation of UiTM Seremban 3 sports student. Next is about literature review. In literature review, there were some theory that the researcher used. For example, the theory from Alexandra Beccari, which is verbal aggression may be interpreted as an attack on a person's self-concept rather than as an attack on a person's position. An attack on one's self-concept can be intended to inflict emotional pain like humiliating, embarrassing, as well as similarly stressful feelings which sometimes can result in physical attacks. While for the motivation, the researcher used the theory of self-determination. That was a common motivational method that researchers used to conduct this study. Then, the principle of self-determination divides motivation into three main sectors, which were external, intrinsic, and motivational. We move to the methodology, which is the research design. The correlational research design will be used in the study. The reason why the researcher used this design is because the researcher want to identify the relationship between independent variable and dependent variable, and all of the data is based on the questionnaire that will contribute to the sample. For sampling, the population of this study is sports student in UiTM Seremban 3. The reason of the researcher choose this sample is because this study is about sports students. Next, the number of population of this study is 951 people based on unit sukan UiTM Seremban 3. And for exclusion criteria was sports student in other UiTM in Malaysia. According to the table Clergy and Morgan, the estimated sample needs to be taken from the total number of population is through 274. So the total sample is 329 after the researcher add 20% to the sample. This study will use probability sampling, and simple random sampling methods will be used in the study to find the sample size that will answer the questionnaire. Next is instrumentation. The study was using a demographic questionnaire. In this demographic questionnaire, it consists of 4 questions, which is gender, male and female, age, race, which is Malay and others, and also level education, diploma and degree. The question has been noted as important variables. In this research, the researcher used a verbal aggressiveness scale. The questionnaire comprised 20 items. The development of the instrument was based on the verbal aggressiveness scale by Dominic, Infante and Charles, and also Wigley. The example of the question were insults people and makes negative judgment on ability. The internal consistency of the scale has been supported by Cronbach Alpha 0.96, and participants were asked to respond on a 5-point Likert scale range from 1 to 5. For dependent variable, situational motivation scale was used in this research, and it was developed by Gui, Valorant and Blanket. The scale is composed of two internally consistent vectors, which is intrinsic and extrinsic. The items were indicated on a 7-point Likert type scale. So the next slide is data collection procedure. This is the flow chart of data collection procedure, where the first step is the researcher need to get ethical approval or permission from UiTM, and then the researcher need to carry out pilot study. Next is refer to the supervisor to proceed the topic of the study, and then distribute questionnaire via Google Form to the respondents, and finally review the questionnaire answered by the respondents and gather all the data for evaluation. For data analysis, this data analysis is aligned with the research objective. For the first research objective, the researcher were using descriptive statistics, while for the second objective, the researcher used inferential statistics. Next, we move to the result, which is descriptive statistic for motivation. It is for the first objective of this research. The maximum mean of descriptive analysis for motivation was intrinsic motivation, which is 4.8647, and the standard deviation is 0.96957, while the lowest mean was extrinsic motivation, which is 4.8244, and the standard deviation is 0.88745. This slide is about Pearson correlation result. According to the table above, the result shows that the relationship between independent variables and dependent variables was shown the positive relationships. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation has shown a positive high relationship with perceived coaches' verbal aggressiveness, with result 0.765. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is statistically significant with perceived coaches' verbal aggressiveness at 0.000, where the P is less than 0.01. As the conclusions, all the relationship shows the variables are highly correlated. Next is about discussion. This slide is about discussion of the first objective. According to the results, the coach's use of verbal aggression lead to an important negative result, which is the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation of the athletes. When individuals with an extrinsic motivation were involved in an activity, they do it to obtain some sort of extra benefits, such as trophies, rather than the enjoyment of the activity of its own. So we can see the motivation factors of the sports students in this study. The next slide is for the second objective. If coaches were using aggressive language skills of contact to their athletes or sports students, it appears that during sports lesson they minimize the possibility of intrinsic motivation and establish control to the sports student. And the outcomes of a significant number of previous studies also found that verbal aggression leads to adverse outcomes regardless of the relationship type. So we can see that the independent variables are relatable with the dependent variable. Last but not least, this slide is about references. All of these references were using in this study. So that's all from me. Thank you and Assalamualaikum.